Imagine locking 7 highly aggressive strangers in this tiny, cramped room.
Oh, that sounds like a terrible idea.
Right, and you just toss a couple of large cardboard boxes into the corner, tell them to go hide in a box if they feel stressed out, and then you just lock the door and watch.
Yeah, that is literally a nightmare scenario.
It really is. It sounds like the setup for some dark psychological thriller. But today, we are looking at a real-world scenario where someone accidentally did exactly that.
Right.
Except they did it with fish. And out of those 7, only 1 survived.
It completely shatters the idyllic, peaceful image we usually associate with aquariums.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, we think of bubbling water, gently swaying green plants, this serene slice of nature right in our living rooms.
Very calming, yeah.
Exactly, very calming. But the reality of artificial ecosystems can be ruthlessly violent when the foundational parameters are misaligned.
And that is exactly what we are unpacking in today's deep dive. Welcome, everyone. We are looking at a highly specific, unexpectedly intense, personal journal entry.
It really is intense.
It was published on August 4th, 2026, by an author who simply goes by the name Ang.
Just Ang, yeah.
Right. And the entry is titled, Notes on Fishkeeping, Part 307, The Last of Golden Mbuna. So our mission today, for you listening, is to explore the incredibly fragile dynamics of enclosed environments. We're using this single catastrophic fish tank as a microcosm for total system failure.
And I think the source material, even though it's brief, it operates as a sort of real-time biological audit.
Right, an audit.
Yeah, Ang started with a population of 7 Golden Mbuna, which are scientifically known as melanochromis-auratus.
Okay.
But by the time this journal entry is actually written, the population has experienced a complete collapse. Ang is basically staring at a failed ecosystem and trying to perform a diagnostic autopsy on the fly.
And the suspects in this whole locked room mystery are just fascinating. Ang details 2 primary forces of destruction that were operating simultaneously.
Yeah.
First, you have this highly visible external force of violence, lethal infighting. But running parallel to that, you have an internal, completely silent killer. A systemic dietary disease.
And the environment always dictates the rules of engagement here. The text gives us some crucial details right up front about what kind of organism we are dealing with.
Which is so important.
It is. The Golden Mbuna is not, a standard docile community fish that you might see drifting lazily in a dentist's office.
Right, they aren't just floating around looking pretty.
Not at all. Ang describes them as one of the most aggressive and notoriously volatile cichlid species in the entire hobby. This is an animal heavily hardwired for intense conflict over resources.
Okay, let's unpack this physical environment. We have this inherently volatile species, and Ang explicitly writes that the size of their tank was, quote, rather small.
Yeah, that rather small is doing a lot of heavy lifting.
Oh, for sure. Now, the author did try to mitigate this lack of square footage. The text notes that they provided multiple hiding spots within the tank. But clearly, those hiding spots did not prevent the massacre. It brings me back to that initial analogy of putting aggressive strangers in a tiny studio apartment.
It's a perfect comparison.
Right, because giving them a cardboard box to hide in doesn't solve the fundamental issue of spatial compression. You are still breathing the same air, you are still in each other's way, and the tension never actually dissipates.
Exactly. The biological concept at play here is environmental carrying capacity, but applied specifically to psychological and territorial space.
Psychological space. Okay,
Yeah, because when you are dealing with a species where extreme territoriality is an evolutionary survival trait, their demand for a perimeter is completely non-negotiable.
It's built in.
It's totally built in. In the wild, these fish live in the rocky shorelines of Lake Malawi.
Okay.
And they stake out a physical claim over a patch of rocks to protect their food source and mating grounds. They patrol a border.
Oh.
So when you put them in a confined glass box, that biological imperative doesn't just, turn off.
So they are desperately trying to draw property lines in a space that is literally smaller than a single natural territory.
Precisely that. Even with environmental enrichment, which is the technical term for adding those caves and hiding spots, the foundational biology of the Golden Mbuna cannot be overridden by simply offering a dark crevice.
Right.
If the overarching territory of the tank is too small, the dominant fish perceives the entire volume of water as a single, actively contested zone.
The hiding spot isn't a sanctuary at all then. It just becomes a corner of the boxing ring where you get trapped.
Yeah, From the perspective of the dominant fish, a subordinate hiding in a cave is still inside its territory.
Oh, wow.
They do not view that cave as a separate, safe jurisdiction. They view it as a vulnerable position held by a rival within an actively hostile border.
That is terrifying.
It is. The biological drive to secure a perimeter completely overwhelms the artificial enrichment provided by the well-meaning caretaker. The boundaries of the glass tank essentially turn those hiding spots into dead ends.
The physical boundaries of that small tank definitely created a powder keg. But a small space alone doesn't necessarily guarantee a massacre.
Sure.
The physical boundaries lock them in, but the specific demographics that Aang introduced into that water loaded the weapon.
Yeah, the specific population makeup accelerated the timeline of the collapse dramatically. Aang points to what the journal calls an imbalanced gender ratio.
Right.
Specifically, there were simply too many males introduced into this enclosed space at the exact same time.
And the text notes that this imbalance led to relentless, unceasing fighting until only a single dominant male remained alive.
Which is incredibly grim to visualize.
Very grim. We aren't talking about a quick scuffle over a piece of food here. We are talking about a systematic elimination, a fight to absolute zero.
What's fascinating here is the mechanics of this biological drive. It's staggering when you look closely at it.
Yeah.
We tend to anthropomorphize animal aggression, right?
Yeah, we view it like a temporary disagreement or a squabble.
Exactly, like they're just having a bad day.
Yeah.
But what this text reveals is how a surplus of males in an inescapable environment triggers a lethal dominance hierarchy driven entirely by line of sight.
Wait, line of sight. Explain how that mechanism works for a fish in a tank.
Okay, so in a natural open water environment like Lake Malawi, a territorial dispute rarely ends in death.
Really?
Yeah. Two males posture, they might lip lock or chase each other, and eventually the weaker submissive male simply swims away.
He just leaves.
He leaves the territory, retreating over the reef and physically removing himself from the dominant male's visual field.
Okay, so he's out of sight.
Right. And once that line of sight is broken, the dominant male's brain registers the threat as neutralized. The territory is secure. The aggression just dials down.
But in a small glass box, there is literally nowhere to swim away to. You can hit the corner, but you are still completely visible.
That is the fatal flaw of the artificial environment. The line of sight is absolute and permanent. The beaten male hits the glass and has to turn around. The dominant male sees him constantly, so his biological programming never registers the territory as secure.
So the threat alarm in the dominant fish's brain is just ringing 24/7.
Exactly. So the attacks never stop.
Yeah.
The dominant fish isn't even acting maliciously. It is trapped in a biological loop, a mandate for absolute singularity that cannot be resolved until all competitors are physically eradicated from its vision.
So if the tank had been significantly larger, like let's say 10 times the volume of water, a massive setup, would this gender ratio have mattered as much? Or were these specific fish just genetically doomed to a battle royale the very moment too many males were put together, regardless of the gallons involved?
Well, that touches on the core tension of ecosystem design. If the tank were exponentially larger, the mechanics of the aggression would actually change.
Okay.
The excess males might have been able to establish their own distinct, non-overlapping territories on opposite ends of the tank.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, they could establish perimeters that do not intersect, using rocks to block that crucial line of sight from one another.
So the genetic aggression would still be present, but the physical environment would allow for avoidance.
Exactly. The lethality in Aang's tank was the direct result of a deadly triangulation. High genetic aggression, an imbalanced male ratio, and a physical boundary that made visual avoidance impossible.
The genetics loaded the gun, the small tank pointed it, and the gender ratio pulled the trigger.
Yeah.
It is just a devastating combination.
He really is.
So we have this incredibly noisy, violent, visible war happening over territory. The males are systematically eliminating each other, but the real tragedy here is that even if they hadn't fought, they were already doomed by something entirely silent.
Right.
Because while those external battles were raging, Aang notes that a secondary internal threat was destroying the tank from the inside out.
And the diagnostic picture gets much more complicated here because Aang introduces a completely separate systemic variable.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Aang suspects that the fish pellets they were feeding the tank were entirely inappropriate for the Golden Mbuna.
Yeah.
The source material notes that this species is primarily herbivorous. In the wild, their natural feeding behavior involves slowly grazing on algae and delicate biofilm that clings to underwater rocks.
Right. Soft stuff.
But in the tank, they were being fed standard processed fish pellets. And Ang suspects this incorrect diet caused a condition called Malawi Bloat, which the text defines as a contagious internal blockage and massive fluid buildup.
It is a profound physiological mismatch.
Totally. And to help you visualize the shock of this mismatch, think about it like putting the wrong fuel into a highly specialized vehicle.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
It is the equivalent of taking a delicate engine designed exclusively to run on refined, unleaded gas and pumping it full of heavy, viscous diesel fuel.
It's going to ruin it.
Right. The engine isn't just getting the wrong type of energy. The physical density of the diesel is actively dumbing up the pistons. The system chokes, the pressure builds, and eventually the engine just seizes up and destroys itself from within.
And the biological mechanics of Malawi Bloat map perfectly onto that engine analogy. Herbivores have evolved very specific digestive tracts.
Okay, how so?
Well, because plant matter and algae are low in immediate nutrients and tough to break down, an herbivore's intestinal tract is exceptionally long.
Ah, I see.
It basically acts as a slow fermentation tube, designed to extract nutrients from low-density foods over an extended period of continuous grazing.
So they're built for a slow, steady trickle of soft material.
Exactly the opposite of a commercial fish pellet. Processed pellets are incredibly high density, often pashed with complex animal proteins, and crucially, they are dehydrated for shelf life.
Right.
So when an herbivorous cichlid gorges on these dry pellets, the food hits their stomach and immediately absorbs water, expanding rapidly.
Like a sponge swelling up inside their stomach.
Yeah, exactly like a sponge. It creates a physical roadblock. Their long, specialized digestive tract cannot move or process this dense, expanding mass of complex protein.
That sounds awful.
It is. The food literally gets stuck and begins to rot inside the intestines. This rotting material triggers massive bacterial fermentation, which produces gas.
No.
The gas causes the intestinal walls to expand dangerously, leading to the severe fluid buildup and internal pressure that Ang described as bloat.
And the symptom description in the journal notes that this is contagious. How does a digestive blockage spread to other fish?
Well, the blockage itself isn't contagious, but the secondary bacterial infection is.
Oh, I see.
When a fish's internal organs are failing from the pressure and rotting food, they begin shedding massive amounts of harmful bacteria directly into the enclosed water column.
So you have a tank full of fish that are already massively stressed and physically exhausted from the territorial warfare, which, plummets their immune systems.
Right.
And while their immune systems are down, they are swimming in water flooded with bacteria from their failing diets.
It is a dual-front war for survival. The external environment is lethal due to the aggression, and the internal environment is failing due to the dense fuel.
Man.
Which makes isolating the exact cause of death for the 6 lost fish nearly impossible for Ang. Did the third male die because the dominant male battered him to death?
Right. Or did he succumb to the internal pressure of Malawi Bloat, die quietly in a hiding spot, and then get scavenged?
Exactly. When multiple systemic failures happen simultaneously, the variables become inextricably tangled.
This highlights how incredibly good intentions can cause catastrophic system failure. Ang wasn't trying to starve these fish.
No, not at all.
The caretaker was actively feeding them, providing what they assumed was life-sustaining nutrients. But because they didn't understand the foundational mechanical needs of the organism, the need for a slow trickle of soft biofilm rather than a dense protein dump, the fuel itself became the poison.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the caretakers assumed all fish operate on the same basic engine. They completely failed to recognize the specialized requirements of the hardware they were managing.
Having unpacked the dual forces of this collapse, the lethal line-of-sight infighting and the silent internal bloat, we have to turn to the present reality of Ang's tank.
The aftermath.
Right, the aftermath of the collapse. We are left with a sole survivor, the last Golden Mbuna standing.
The single dominant male who successfully eradicated his visual perimeter.
And this is where the text takes a very unexpected psychological turn. Ang writes this final line. Nevertheless, since we're left with one fish for now, we can verify whether the fish pellets are suitable for the Golden Mbuna.
The tonal shift in that single sentence is really jarring.
It is.
Throughout the entire journal entry, Ang writes from the perspective of a struggling, likely stressed hobbyist, watching their project rapidly decline and trying to figure out what went wrong. But in that final thought, all sentimentality vanishes. The tone shifts completely into the realm of a pragmatic, emotionally detached scientific observer.
It is entirely clinical. There is no mourning for the 6 lost fish. It is just a sudden pivot to data collection.
Biologically speaking, the chaotic environment of that tank has suddenly, violently stabilized.
Because there's only one left.
Right. With only one fish remaining, the variable of lethal infighting has been completely eliminated. There is absolutely nobody left to fight.
Yeah.
The entire volume of that small tank is now one undisputed secure territory. The line of sight is clear. So the author realizes they are now in a unique position to run a perfectly controlled experiment on the final fish regarding the diet.
This raises an important question, though, doesn't it?
It does. This raises an important question about the ethics and practicalities of learning through failure.
So what does this all mean? To me, it highlights the incredibly grim practicality of learning through failure. Aang is essentially writing a note to the internet saying, well, the battle royale is over. We're down to a population of 1. We might as well use the stable ruins of this ecosystem to see if it was the fast food that killed the others.
Right.
It is a dark pivot, but you have to admire the ruthless efficiency of the scientific method being applied here.
Aang has isolated the variable by default. The imbalanced gender ratio is no longer a factor. The population is 1.
Yeah.
The spatial constraints are resolved. The one fish owns every single hiding spot without contest. Now, if this last fish continues to eat the pellets and eventually develops the gas and fluid buildup of Malawi Bloat, Aang has definitive, isolated proof that the diet is fatal for this species.
You salvage the data from the disaster.
Exactly.
When you step back and look at the whole picture, it is amazing how much complex biology and behavioral psychology is hidden in what is really a very short, simple journal entry.
The layers of causality are dense. We started with a microcosm of extreme territorial aggression.
Right.
We explored how an inherently volatile species from the rocky shores of Lake Malawi, combined with an imbalanced male-heavy ratio, turned a small glass box into a lethal gladiator arena.
Yeah.
The biological imperative to clear the visual perimeter simply overpowered the physical constraints of the tank.
And, running parallel to that visible violence, we uncovered the invisible dietary catastrophe.
Yeah.
The caretaker's perfectly well-intentioned choice to feed dehydrated, expanding protein pellets to a species mechanically adapted for soft, continuous grazing introduced a systemic internal failure.
2 entirely different vectors of destruction operating in the exact same tiny volume of water.
It is a masterclass in why managing any artificial ecosystem is so punishing. You have to anticipate and align both the behavioral physics of the space and the internal physiology of the inhabitants.
Right, because if one parameter is off, the whole structure shakes. If 2 are off, it collapses.
And for you listening, this goes far beyond fish in a glass box. Whether you are managing an aquarium in your living room, or you are managing a complex team of personalities at work, or you are trying to hold together a massive, multi-tiered logistical project, the broader application here is unavoidable.
Oh, absolutely.
If you ignore the foundational inherent traits of the individual components in your system, if you ignore their need for psychological space, or if you fundamentally misunderstand what kind of fuel they actually require to operate efficiently, you will inevitably lead that system to failure.
Yeah.
You cannot force a specialized engine to run on cheap diesel, and you cannot force highly territorial elements to share a tiny studio apartment without an explosion.
The environment must be tailored to match the nature of the organism or the component.
Exactly.
The moment a manager or a caretaker expects the foundational nature of the organism to magically change just to suit a convenient, poorly designed environment, the countdown to collapse begins.
It always falls apart. Which brings me to a final puzzle, a final thought for you to mull over as you go about your day. Okay? It builds directly on Aang's final, cold, scientific pivot. Aang plans to test this pellet food on the one last fish, the dominant survivor, the controlled experiment.
Right.
But think about the survivor's bias built into this plan. If this single fish actually survives on the pellets long term, does that truly prove the diet was fine all along and that the other 6 fish were purely victims of the dominance war?
That's a great point.
Or is it entirely possible that this last fish is simply the most genetically robust of the group? A fish possessing an iron stomach that is currently masking a slow, agonizing dietary poisoning.
The variables might still be tangled, even with an isolated subject.
Exactly. It leaves you wondering, In any failing system, whether it is a collapsing fish tank, a failing corporate structure, or a broken piece of software, how can we ever truly isolate a single cause of failure when multiple disasters are happening simultaneously?
Nearly impossible.
We always want that clean diagnosis. We want the obvious answer so we can point at it and say, there it is, that is what went wrong.
Yeah.
But the truth is, most of the time, we are just staring into murky water, trying to make sense of the shadows, and waiting to see what happens to the last one standing. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We will catch you next time.